Hello there, my beautiful friends, and welcome to the Duality of Life podcast. My name is Julia, and I'm super grateful to welcome you into this one. Today, I'm going to be diving into why it potentially might not be anxiety that you're struggling with, but you're holding a lot of shame. Shame is strongly linked to anxiety and pretty much every single psychological disorder out there. And avoiding shame is more of a problem than facing shame head on. But shame is deeply painful and deeply complex, and we're going to be diving into all of that in this episode. I do just want to say that I have been having troubles with my actual podcast microphone, so that's why if you're watching this on video, you see a little handheld microphone or clip-on microphone attached to a spatula, and it is just a little bit windy outside, so hopefully I can clean up the audio as much as possible, so that way it's a clean and nice, engaging audio or visual for you. However, I'm going to be talking a lot and referencing a lot of Christopher Germer's work along with John Bradshaw, and I'll also be referencing several studies I've got my hands on as well that I will totally and fully link down in the description box or show notes. This work has honestly helped me so much in recognizing my own humanity and recognizing the humanity in other people as well. And I think that is such a beautiful and key feature to knowing that we are whole as we are. We are human beings and we are, flawed in our own unique ways. And there isn't some polarizing view that we have to fall under to not gain love or to gain love. We can just be human and we are worthy all the same. So shame is something I have in-depth personal experience with, and it is why I have such a passion for this topic. And I believe I'm not just sharing my story when I share my story, but I'm sharing a collective story because so many people can relate to the things that I'm feeling and the things that I've experienced. So in a way, I'm not just sharing my story as an individual, I'm just sharing a story. And I know so many people can relate to it on. But I had no idea I was holding shame for a really long time. And I even remember vividly when my friend mentioned that she was struggling with shame and she had worked on a lot of shame with her therapist, but that was still the thing that she struggled most with. I felt bad for her. I was like, oh wow, like that's, an intense thing to deal with. Meanwhile, I had no idea that that was actually the problem I was struggling with. This inner feeling that I was unworthy of love, this inner belief that I was never chosen as a child, so why would anyone choose me now? These really intense triggers that I had stemmed from toxic shame. There is healthy shame, which is totally innate and has evolved with our species, our human species, and is totally perfectly healthy to experience. Shame helps us in John Bradshaw's work. It helps us to identify our limits, and so then we can set boundaries. If we don't have limits and boundaries, we often will get confused and won't really have much direction. So when we can identify our limits, when we have this healthy amount of shame that helps us recognize when we've acted out of character or act out of a moral belief that we have, it triggers us to feel shame, so that way we can fix that behavior or address that behavior. But toxic shame is holding the belief that we are wrong. We are innately wrong, but we are not innately wrong. And it often is linked to childhood trauma, but it could also just be from a parent that wasn't quote unquote good enough in the firm yet understanding handling of our emotions. And every child is different, so no parent can be perfect. And one child may grow up perfectly okay, and another child of theirs could grow up with toxic shame. Sometimes our individuality will determine what level of firmness and a level of compassion that we need as children to develop a healthy and approachable level of shame. Do you ever realize that you want to get to know yourself a little bit better, and you remember that all of the self-help gurus and spiritual people online are telling you that you should journal? And so you sit down, you try the thing, and your journal kind of looks like this. Or maybe it looks a little bit like this. This is nothing. This is you not journaling because, yeah. Well, if this is you, then I've got the tool for you. I just finished creating a year's worth of journal prompts, 52 weeks of journaling, 1 session a week, each with 8 to 14 questions, all curated to bring you on your own unique journey through each session, and dive deep into different facets of your life, like relationships, trust, inner child work, self-compassion, while also sparking that creativity and whimsy, because in my personal opinion, doing this quote-unquote deep work is not just about the hard-hitting questions, it's also allowing play, imagination, and lightness to be welcomed into your life as well. So if you're somebody that needs a lot more structure and motivation when it comes to their journaling practice, I think this will be so amazing for you. Click the link, top link down in the description box, and start your year's worth of journal prompts today. And thank you for your support. Much appreciated. Mwah. And for myself, as a coping mechanism to deal with childhood trauma, I had developed what Sean Bradshaw calls a more than human persona. And so I had developed a overconfidence about myself, a loudness and intensity about myself that was masking this inner belief that I was unlovable and unworthy. And I hid behind pretending to be pure, pretending to be innocent, pretending to be calm and spiritual and connected to the earth and connected to the world around me. And I hid behind spiritual language and inner knowings and wisdom and intuitive nature that I do hold a more natural intuitive nature, but I hid behind that. And again, didn't even really realize how much I was struggling with shame until about 2023. So although my grandiose and more than human persona is not the direct more than human persona that everyone will experience. Some people may, try to get really, really rich so that way they can feel better about themselves than other people. And they will believe that that is what makes them better. They'll believe that they're more attractive, they're richer, they're cooler, they're more experienced. They just create this more than human persona of themselves to feel good about themselves, to soothe that feeling of actually deep down not believing that they are worthy of love. And this can also feed into victim mentality as well, believing that everything horrible that has ever happened to us is a result of somebody else's actions. So that more than human persona is very much a thing that develops as a coping mechanism or protective behavior to hide that internal belief that we are not worthy. But some people also develop a less than human persona, and that less than human persona is going to feed into delinquent type behavior, if you will, that could be abusing substances, that could be a life of crime or prostitution, hanging around with other people that have a less than human persona. Basically, we are looking for ways and substances or things that feed into the idea that we are not worthy. So we are going to act in a way that is not acceptable by the majority of society to prove that we are not worthy of love. A big way that I had this grandiose idea of myself was actually through food. So my eating disorder came with a lot of judgment of other people in the way that they ate. So I believed that I had all of the answers to eat healthy, to make sure that I wasn't going to get cancer, to make sure that I, was attractive and fit and all of these things. And I believed that I had the answers for those things. And so then I would internally and sometimes externally judge people for how they eat or how they exercised. And this also came with some people believing that I did have the answers, and they would come to me and show me their food or show me, what they were eating or how they were exercising to gain my approval. But that is not healthy at all. I was feeding into restrictive mindsets myself, which kept me stuck for a very long time. And only recently, over the last year, have I actually pulled myself out of that completely. And yes, it was a slow process, and I had hit very many bottlenecks that made me feel very afraid to move to the next piece. But as I was moving through my more than human persona, kind of recognizing that I even had that, I had to kind of move to a less than human persona where I was deeply depressed and feeling very awful about myself and feeding into many behaviors that just weren't healthy. And so I kind of moved from this more than human to less than human, and I couldn't really find the middle. And slowly but surely I was working through many, many things that eventually I've been brought here. Still lots of work to do, but this is a lifelong process, especially because I experienced trauma, and many people that experience childhood trauma, it's a lifelong process. It is. However, whether you have a more than human persona or less than human persona, this internalized toxic shame of believing that we are not good enough, not lovable, and unworthy, disgusting, dirty, all of these negative things that we hold deep down inside of ourselves. When we internalize those things, we are more likely to develop PTSD and dissociation. And dissociation was my coping mechanism as well with childhood trauma. I remember most of my childhood from a bird's eye view, most of my teen years from a bird's eye view, and it only was until I was about 18, 19 years old that I felt a lot closer to my face. I remember almost as if I'm still outside of my body, but right beside me versus up in the corner and on the other side of the room, for instance, or way above me. And this was a slow process until about 23, which then also fed into that less than human persona because I had learned slowly to stop dissociating. And because I was no longer dissociating and I was kind of sitting in my own feelings and wasn't hiding behind that grandiose, more than human persona of myself, I felt all of the shame, I felt all of the dirtiness, and I stopped hiding from my intense emotions. I tried. I tried a lot, and I traveled the world in the quest for hiding of these intense feelings, but the PTSD just started to surge, and it was very, very difficult for me to navigate. The important thing to recognize here is that both ideas of the self are wrong. Like I said, there is a middle ground that we have to find. And in this middle ground, there is the recognition that we are human, and with humanity does not come perfection, but either way, no, not either way, with that normal human flawedness that we all have, we are still lovable, worthy, and acceptable of someone else's love and our own love as well. We do not have to be perfect to gain love. And now that I've pointed out these more than human and less than human ways of hiding this intense or feeding into this intense feeling that we are unlovable, it is important to note that this is because shame is deeply complex and likes to hide. Its actual natural kind of defense mechanism is to make us hide. If we ever feel shame, we want to hide away from the world. We want to isolate ourselves. And as a young child might do, they might cover their eyes in a magical thinking that if they cover their eyes, then the person that they're trying to get away from or hide from won't see them. And that is a pure example of a feeling of shame in childhood where we try to hide ourselves. We don't want to be seen. And that carries in adulthood as well. We fear vulnerability. We fear being seen. And so we either hide with intense, maybe not intense, but behaviors that feed into the idea that we are not worthy, doing drugs, a life of crime, prostitution, all of these things. We almost are doing these things, we are performing these behaviors to make other people believe that we are also not worthy. So we are hiding behind these things because we are actually just afraid of being vulnerable. And vice versa. If we have overconfidence and we hide through magical thinking and fantasy, then when we experience real life, we have a very hard time being vulnerable with another person, and we may see our vulnerability as unlovable as well. When you have that underlying belief that you are flawed, wrong, broken, damaged, dirty, disgusting, shameful, all of these awful things, when we have that underlying belief about ourselves, that is naturally going to come with anxiety. Anxiety disorders are one of the leading causes of disability worldwide. And because anxiety often doesn't occur alone, it overlaps with depression, substance abuse problems, or an eating disorder, toxic relationship cycles. It doesn't necessarily have to be a substance that we are addicted to, but something outside of us that we want to latch on to for control or escape. While anxiety is extremely disabling and one of the top causes for disability worldwide, it rarely causes direct death. And because of that, its true impact is often underestimated in health policies, and treatment gaps are massive, with many people, especially in low and middle income countries, just never receiving care, and even in high income countries, people delaying care for years and years and years. Anxiety is typically something we believe that we can just handle on our own. It's just something that we have to move through. We have to grow our confidence, or whatever the case is. But anxiety isn't, or I should rephrase, chronic anxiety usually doesn't come without a cause. Again, we can experience healthy levels of shame and we can experience healthy levels of anxiety. Both of these things are totally normal and innate human emotion that we should experience in this life. They help redirect us, they help us avoid confusion, set boundaries, and find our limits. But when they are chronic inside of us, we are living with chronic anxiety and chronic shame, this hinders our life in so many ways. This is a human experience that so many people are struggling with. And when I say it is one of the top leading causes of disability in the world, I want you to take that into consideration. So many people struggle with this. So I really want to put this in everyone that is listening to this head. You are not the exception to the rule. You are not the only one that is broken. You are not the one that is broken. If I can work through what I have been working through, if so many other people can work through what they've gone through to pull themselves out of toxic shame, so can you, because you are human and no human is better than the other. We have different experiences that we have internalized and learned how to cope with in very unique ways. You are not broken. No one is broken. No human is perfect, but you do not need to be perfect to be loved. You also don't have to prove that you are broken, so broken that you will never be able to receive love. What you are experiencing is a completely normal human thing, but it is our responsibility to solve if we are living with toxic shame. Shame is typically not the cause of us. Like, we haven't developed toxic shame for no reason. It's usually stemming from some sort of trauma, or what John Bradshaw calls our will. When our will is broken, we will develop, like I've already said, a more than human or less than human persona, and that is toxic shame. So again, developing toxic shame as a child is rarely, and when I say rarely, like, it's freaking impossible that it's your fault. But as an adult, like I've said, it is our responsibility to solve. This is a complex unraveling within oneself, and because most of us don't remember our childhood with clear accuracy, it's less about finding the exact moment or moments toxic shame developed, and more about recognizing this is a human experience that we can work through. Complex trauma, of course, is important to address and work through, but when we are operating from a place of toxic shame, it is extremely difficult to hold our experiences. And so we first have to learn how to hold ourselves before we can actually work through the experiences. And I think this is something a lot of people don't fully understand or recognize with healing work. They think that they have to completely dive into the depths of their trauma to pull themselves out and to learn and to grow and to be happy, when actually we need to create a foundation if we are operating from toxic shame. If we do not have a foundation that we are innately worthy of love and compassion and worthy of acceptance, we will not be able to hold the most intense experiences that we've had in this life. And so to dive into the depths of our trauma without having a foundation to hold ourselves is a recipe for absolute disaster. And so we need to work on our self-compassion. Self-coldness, which is described as self-criticism, isolation, and over-identification, all of these things have been linked to not a great well-being, anxiety, depression, just a negative effect on the self. And again, depression and a negative view of the self are rarely present without anxiety, which is rarely present without shame. So because of this, we need an antidote. And like I've said, self-compassion is the answer. So what is self-compassion? They, in the study, mention self-criticism, isolation, over-identification as key themes to this depressive, anxiety, self-coldness experience. And the formal definition of self-compassion is mindfulness. So we need to be aware that we are struggling. We need to name the feelings that we are feeling and not over-identify with negative feelings, not over-identify with we are wrong, we are disgusting, we are unworthy. And so that's why all of these yucky feelings are present inside of us. We can experience shame and name shame. I'm feeling ashamed, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling unlovable, I'm feeling whatever the feeling is. We have to be mindful of that experience inside of ourselves. We then need kinship, which is the opposite of isolation. We need relationship. We need to know that we are not the only one experiencing what we are experiencing and moving through what we are moving through. And some people will do this as to not trigger themselves with interpersonal relationships, because interpersonal relationships can really be a mirror to oneself and could trigger us down a negative thought loop or a very vulnerable place that we are not ready to go. And so you could find kinship or relationship with parasocial relationships, so following influencers that have gone through difficult things in their life and now have quote unquote pulled themselves out or healed. I really don't like the term healed because I think it's overemphasizing an end destination, which to me doesn't exist, but that's besides the point. You can read books of people that have experienced difficult things in your life. You just need to know that you are not the only one experiencing the things that you are going through. And of course, actual personal relationship is a beautiful way of doing that, but could be a bit overwhelming at some point. And then we need to develop self-kindness, a warm and accepting attitude of ourselves. So I'm going to go through this again because I think this is really important to recognize the difference between. So mindfulness is the antidote to self-absorption or over-identification and rumination. So we need to name our feelings instead of over-identifying with our feelings and ruminating on our feelings. We need common humanity, which is the formal definition in mindfulness, in self-compassion. We need common humanity, so relationships, kinship with people, which is the antidote to isolation and loneliness, a lacking of meaningful relationships or connections, or limiting one's connections to other people. And then we need self-kindness, which is an antidote to self-criticism. Shame is a universal and innate desire to be loved. If you do not like the word loved, it could be an innate and human universal desire to be respected, cared for, wanted, included, connected to other people. To reclaim this universal desire is a beautiful thing, and to know that you are experiencing these intense feelings of loneliness and isolation and self-criticism and rumination and not liking oneself because you actually desire to be loved, and you were potentially taught as a child that that love is conditional, and so you have to be a certain type of way to gain it, which then allows us not to be authentic, and to know that we are innately lovable and worthy also allows us to lean into our authenticity, because when we can be authentic, when we can express ourselves as our true beingness and experience the world not from hiding in vulnerability or hiding from vulnerability, but from a place of knowing that you are lovable, that is deeply beautiful. And so how to move from this self-absorbed, isolating self-criticism, just lacking of self-compassion, which all of these things are key features of shame, which again, shame strongly linked to anxiety, vice versa. And if we are experiencing chronic anxiety, there's probably toxic shame involved. So to dive into this and move from that space to a more naturally loving oneself place, we need to entertain that there is a neutral self. Like I've mentioned before, I went from a more than human persona to a less than human persona because it's like it's the pendulum, the polarity pulling me from one to the next. And when I realized how deeply flawed and how deeply messed up my humanity is, instead of hiding it and not wanting to feel my vulnerability, when I started to feel my vulnerability, it was really, really intense and swung me from one end of the pendulum to the next. And I had to entertain the idea that I am human, and all of these things that I am experiencing are just part of the human experience, and I am not an exception to the rule. I am not a broken, flawed, innate creature. What I am is innately lovable, worthy, and capable of connection and healing. I am not the exception to a rule. I am not so broken that I can never find healing or find peace. And there is peace, acceptance, vulnerability, and beauty in my flawedness, and I need to be brave enough to feel that myself and eventually allow other people in relationship to see as well. Shame limits you in so many ways, and one of the fears that I am still working through and think that it will take me time and probably a long-term relationship to fully move through is that vulnerability with another person, to really allow myself to trust that if I cry or scream or have what I call a tantrum and somebody else sees it, that they won't just immediately deem me as unlovable because of it. And although somebody may deem me as unlovable because of that intense emotion that they see, means that they're just not my person. They don't have a broad view or open view of what being human really means, and that's probably just going to bottleneck us eventually in the relationship. But I think until I can find somebody that is willing to accept those parts of me, there's going to be a lot of healing in that, and probably a lot of peace in that as well. So I think although I have made drastic shifts and changes in my life and really do believe that I will find and choose somebody that is able to hold my humanity, until I actually have that experience, I think the puzzle won't fully be put together. But that's not to put my healing on anybody else. I think it's just experiential, like I really believe that that is my humanity, and that is so normal that I experience given all of the circumstances, and it's okay that I experience it. It's okay that anyone experiences it, and I hold myself in it. And I've learned so much of how to be self-compassionate towards myself in these moments, but I'm human and I will get triggered. And this is also why I don't like the term healed, because again, I think healed kind of overemphasizes this idea of arriving somewhere, where the arrival, I think, is just recognizing humanity and knowing that you're gonna feel intense emotions sometimes, you're gonna feel happy emotions sometimes, and neither are wrong or better than the other. Obviously, dealing with difficult emotion is difficult and painful, but it's human and it's normal and it's okay as long as it's not at a chronic or toxic level. And feeling happy and joyous and having lots of confidence is totally amazing and healthy, as long as it's balanced out with recognizing that we are human and not some perfect being and hide ourselves behind our false confidence or behind our confidence. And to know that these darker, quote unquote, sides of myself are nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to hide, and they are just a beautiful part of this human experience that we all get to have. And accepting these parts of myself is only going to help me lean into my authenticity, help me connect with people more intently and more genuinely, and also work through difficult patterns that I've experienced in my life, like toxic relationships and my eating disorder. So I hope that I have been able to show you and share with you that shame is deeply connected to anxiety, rarely ever operates alone. And if you are struggling with chronic anxiety or depression, addressing and looking at shame could be a beautiful and helpful tool for you, but it is extremely intense, and of course recommend you doing it with a professional if you are able to afford one, and or making connections with parasocial relationships to just open the door for you to recognize that you're not the only human, to read books or maybe connect with a coach or content like this. Exactly. So I truly hope that you enjoyed today's episode and got some value out of it in some way, shape, or form. I am super grateful to have you and talk about these topics. I just care so much about them because I know that I am not the only one experiencing what I have experienced, and there is so much power in sharing and connecting through these things with one another. And if you are looking for a tool on your self-compassion journey, I've created a year's worth of journal prompts, one session a week for an entire year. Each week, you're going to be diving into a different subject, whether that be inner child work, self-compassion, trust and relationships, variety of different deep and in-depth topics to get to know yourself a lot more and create self-compassion, while also sparking creativity and joy with lots of whimsical questions as well. And in each journaling session, I've designed it to flow effortlessly from one question to the next to really bring you on a journey. Click the link down in the description box or show notes to get your year's worth of journal prompts now. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode, and I am so grateful to have you listening and helping me create a space to share my journey while also giving helpful tips. And if you found today's episode useful, please send it to a friend or a loved one. It helps me connect with lots more people and share my message while also creating a safe space for everyone involved. Sending you lots of love, peace, joy, and self-compassion, and I'll see you again very soon.